When the order of civilization burned to ash in the flames of the plane crash, the Ice Queen CEO from the top of the food chain and the corporate drone from the bottom were thrown together onto a deserted island where only the primal laws applied. Power, wealth, and status all wiped clean. Here, the only thing that determined life or death was the instinct to survive. A high-stakes game of conquest and submission, of taming and being tamed, was about to begin. How would the untouchable queen slowly be broken down into a maid, belonging to one man and one man only? 1. Sir, please return your seat to the upright position and stow your tray table. We are beginning our final descent. The flight attendant's sickeningly sweet voice buzzed in my ear. My name is Ethan Hayes, and at this moment, I was sitting a Gulfstream G650 on its way to a private island in the Pacific. To be honest, it was my first time on a private jet this luxurious, and I was a nervous wreck. My palms were slick with sweat. I snuck a glance diagonally across the aisle. Her, my boss, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, Victoria Sterling. She was reclining in a priceless leather seat, holding a glass of 82 Lafite, her posture as elegant as a swan's. She wore a perfectly tailored white pantsuit, her long hair pinned up, revealing a smooth, high forehead and delicate collarbones. Her face was permanently locked in a mask of ice, as if the air for 10 feet in any direction might freeze solid from her chill alone. We were on our way to her father's 70th birthday party, the chairman of Sterling Enterprises. Me, a project manager from one of the lower rungs of the company, had only managed to snag a seat on this plane through sheer dumb luck. The CEO's executive assistant came down with acute appendicitis at the last minute, and I was grabbed to fill in, tasked with carrying bags and handling grunt work. Ethan, Victoria's voice, cold and devoid of any warmth, cut through the air. I jolted, immediately sitting straighter. Yes, Miss Sterling. What can I do for you? She didn't even turn to look at me. She simply swirled the wine in her glass, gazing out at the churning sea of clouds. The second phase proposal for the resort project, she said flatly. Why was it rejected? My stomach dropped. Damn it. The chickens had come home to roost. I had led the team on that proposal. We'd pulled 3 all-nighters, only for her to tear it to shreds in front of the entire board. I forced myself to speak, my voice tight. Ms. Sterling, the proposal primarily focused on cost control and cost. She finally turned her head, her sharp, beautiful eyes filled with derision and contempt. Ethan, I pay you to create, not to save me pocket change. I wanted a landmark, a masterpiece that would define a city's skyline, not some cheap, pathetic copy that reeks of insecurity. If you can't even grasp my basic intent, what are you good for? Her voice wasn't loud, but every word was an icicle stabbing straight into my pride. The other executives on the plane shot me looks of pity. I balled my fists, my nails digging into my palms. This was Victoria Sterling, a woman who lived in the clouds and looked down on everyone else through her nose. In her world, low-level employees like me weren't even people. We were just tools to execute her will. I took a deep breath, swallowing the fire in my gut, and managed a subservient smile. You're right, Miss Sterling. I failed to grasp her vision. I'll have a team redo it as soon as we get back. There is no getting back for you, she said, her voice dropping to absolute zero. You're off the project. When we land, you'll stay at the hotel until we're ready to return. Don't embarrass me further. My mind went blank and blood rushed to my head. Public humiliation. This was a raw, naked, public humiliation. I stared at her, my chest heaving. Just then, the aircraft gave a violent shudder. A scream ripped through the cabin's quiet hum. The wine glass flew from Victoria's hand, splashing red across her white suit, leaving her looking utterly flustered. What's going on? One of the executives yelled in panic. The cabin lights began to flicker wildly as a deafening alarm blared to life. Attention passengers. We've hit severe turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain calm. The voice over the intercom was trembling. Anyone could tell this was bad. The plane began to buck violently, like a canoe in a hurricane, threatening to tear apart at any moment. Outside, the once white clouds had turned to churning, inky black, shot through with silver veins of lightning. A sudden feeling of weightlessness. We were falling. Help me. Cries, screams, and prayers merged into a symphony of chaos. The cabin had descended into apocalyptic mayhem. I gripped my armrest for dear life, feeling like my organs were being torn from their moorings. I jerked my head to the side and saw Victoria's face, pale as a sheet. The eternally composed Ice Queen was finally showing a crack in her facade. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her body trembling like a leaf. A sick sense of satisfaction washed over me. Go on, put on your airs now. Act so high and mighty. In the face of death, you're just another scared little woman. Boom! An earth-shattering roar, and I felt as if I'd been struck by a giant sledgehammer. The world went black, and I lost consciousness. I don't know how much time passed. The salty sea breeze and a piercing sunlight dragged me back from the abyss. I opened my eyes, my head splitting. I was lying on a golden beach. Not far off lay the wreckage of the plane, a severed wing smoking, half submerged in the turquoise water. It was silent, except for the gentle lapping of the waves. No other human sounds. I struggled to my feet and checked myself over. Aside from a few scrapes and a killer headache, I was somehow in one piece. I survived. I scanned my surroundings. This was a completely unfamiliar island, a dense wall of tropical green that looked like an impenetrable cage. It was all over. The executives, the flight attendants. They were likely gone. Just as despair began to set in, a flash of white in the water caught my eye. It was Victoria. Without a second thought, I scrambled into the ocean, fighting the current. It took every ounce of my strength to drag her back to the shore. She was soaked, her expensive suit clinging to her body, outlining curves that could stop a man's heart. But her eyes were closed, her face was deathly pale, and she wasn't breathing. I checked for a pulse at her neck and breath from her nose. She was still alive. I immediately started CPR. Compressions. Rescue breaths. As my lips pressed against hers, a strange sensation shot through me. This woman, who I wouldn't dare even dream of touching, was now lying here like a broken doll, completely at my mercy. Cough! Cough, cough! A spray of seawater erupted from her lips. Victoria coughed violently, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around in a daze. When her gaze finally focused on me, her expression shifted instantly from confusion to alarm and disgust. She shoved me away, struggling to sit up. Her first words were, "Where are the others?" I collapsed onto the sand, breathing heavily, and gave a bitter laugh. Gone. They're all gone. Congratulations, Miss Sterling. It looks like it's just the two of us on this island now. Victoria's body went rigid. She stared at the strange, hostile wilderness around us, then down at her own ruined clothes. The color drained from her face, but she was Victoria Sterling, after all. After a few seconds of panic, she visibly composed herself, that imperious aura snapping back in a place around her like a shield. She looked at me and spoke in a tone of command. "Ethan, I want you to search the perimeter immediately. Look for survivors or anything useful. Then find a way to signal for help." I looked at her, and I smiled. "Miss Sterling, have you not figured it out yet?" I slowly rose to my feet, walked over to her, and looked down at her, my shadow falling across her face. "There is no MS Sterling here. There are no employees. This is a deserted island. The rules at 30,000 feet don't apply down here. Now," I said, letting each word land like a stone, "my rules are the only rules. 2. Sun, sand, and the skeleton of a private jet. And me, with a CEO who was used to owning the world." The whole scene felt absurd. Victoria stared at me, dumbfounded by my words. Her beautiful eyes flashed from shock to a simmering rage. In her 20-something years of life, it was likely the first time anyone had ever dared to speak to her in that tone. "Ethan, what are you trying to say?" Her voice was laced with ice. "Is this a mutiny? A mutiny?" I laughed as if it were the funniest joke I'd ever heard. "Ms. Sterling, look around. Is this your corner office? Can you swipe your credit card here? Can you call your bodyguards?" I spread my hands, gesturing to the endless ocean and the deep, dark jungle. "Here, your money, your power, and that pretty face of yours are worth absolutely nothing. The only things that will keep you alive are food, water, and me." With every sentence, I took a step closer. Victoria instinctively shrank back, a flicker of fear finally showing through her tough exterior. She gritted her teeth, trying to hold on to her authority. Don't you forget, you are still an employee of Sterling Enterprises. Once we're rescued, I will make you. Make me what? Fire me. Make sure I never work again. I cut her off, crouching down to meet her gaze, a playful smile on my face. Miss Sterling, are you still convinced we're going to be rescued? My words were like a bucket of ice water, extinguishing the last of her delusions. It was true. A private flight, off course from major shipping lanes, crashed on an island that probably wasn't even on a map. Rescue. The odds were about the same as winning the Powerball. Victoria's face went completely white. It was a ghastly shade of fear, despair, and utter disbelief. Seeing her like that, the knot of anger and resentment in my chest finally began to loosen. I stood up, ignoring her, and started scavenging around the plane's wreckage. We had to find fresh water and food, and fast. Otherwise, we wouldn't even make it through the night, let alone wait for a rescue that might never come. Victoria sat frozen, watching me work. The sea breeze tangled her hair, and her expensive suit was stained with sand and grime. The queen of the boardroom, who moved markets with a single word, now looked as fragile as a lost child. After a long while, she finally spoke, her voice hoarse. What? What do we do now? Her tone had lost its commanding edge, replaced by a tremor she couldn't hide. I didn't look back, rummaging through a busted suitcase. If you want to live, you get to work, I said flatly. Go look for any unbroken bottles or anything that can hold water. It was the first time I had ever given her an order. She didn't argue. After a few seconds of silence, she shakily got to her feet and began to stumble along the beach, obeying my command like a marionette. Half an hour later, I had salvaged a mostly intact first aid kit containing some bandages, antiseptic, and painkillers. The biggest prize, however, was a survival multi-tool. Victoria, for her part, had found 2 empty plastic water bottles that hadn't been crushed. The sun was getting hotter, and my lips were already starting to crack. Victoria was in worse shape. Her lips were peeling, and her face was flushed with dehydration. She walked up to me, her voice weak. Ethan, I'm so thirsty. Is there any water? I glanced at her, then pulled a small bottle of saline solution from the first aid kit. I twisted it open and took a sip myself. The salty liquid was disgusting, but it would at least replenish some essential minerals. I screwed the cap back on and put the bottle away. Victoria's eyes were glued to the bottle the entire time, her throat moving as she swallowed dryly. Give me a little, she said, her voice almost a plea. I smiled. Miss Sterling, if you want to drink now, you have to do more than just ask. I held up the multi-tool. From now on, I control the distribution of all resources on this island. What do you want? She asked, her eyes wary. Simple. I pointed toward the dark, dense jungle nearby. See those woods? We have to find a cave for shelter and a real source of fresh water before nightfall. You're coming with me. Me? The look on her face was one of pure revulsion. In a place like that, I can't. You can't. I scoffed. Fina, stay here then. But let me make one thing clear. I only share food and water with people who are useful. And I decide what useful means. I slung the first aid kit over my shoulder, gripped the multi-tool, and turned to walk toward the jungle. Wait! Victoria scrambled to her feet and rushed to block my path. I'll go with you, she said through clenched teeth, her eyes burning with humiliation. That's better. I nodded, satisfied. Remember, Miss Sterling, on this island, there's no high and mighty, no low and humble. There are only people who can work and useless deadweight waiting to die. Which one? I asked, looking her dead in the eye. Do you want to be? Victoria's chest rose and fell rapidly. She glared at me, speechless. She knew I was right. In this godforsaken place, everything she took pride in was a joke. And me, the lowly employee she barely even registered, now held her life in my hands. She closed her eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. When she opened them again, the anger was gone, replaced by a dead, resigned look. I'll follow you. With that, she lowered her head and quietly fell in a step behind me. Watching her, a profound sense of satisfaction washed over me. Victoria Sterling. Look at you now. 3. Entering the jungle was like stepping into another world. Towering trees blotted out the sky. allowing only dappled patches of sunlight to reach the floor. The air was thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. Ah! A short, sharp scream came from behind me. I turned to see Victoria pointing at the ground in terror. A brightly colored centipede was slowly crawling past her high-heeled shoe. "What are you yelling about?" I snapped. "You want to attract every predator in this jungle." My sharp tone made her choke back the rest of her scream. Her face was pale, and her body was still trembling. I shook my head, amused. This was the ruthless CEO, scared of a bug. I ignored her and continued, using the multi-tools blade to hack away at the thick vines blocking our path. After about an hour of trekking, Victoria hit her limit. She collapsed on the ground, panting heavily. Her blouse was soaked with sweat, clinging to her body in a way that was both pathetic and strangely alluring. I can't walk anymore," she gasped. My feet." I glanced back at her blistered feet and the ridiculous designer heels she was wearing. I had to admit, trying to hike through a jungle in those was a special kind of torture. "Take them off," I ordered. "What?" She froze, a blush rising on her cheeks as she looked at me with defiance. I said, "Take off the shoes." I repeated, my voice harder. "Or do you want your feet to get infected so you can't walk at all tomorrow?" Under my unrelenting stare, she finally gave in. She unbuckled the straps and painfully peeled the shoes off. I could see her heels were rubbed raw, and several angry blisters had already formed. I took the antiseptic and a roll of bandages from the kit and tossed them in front of her. "Clean yourself up." With that, I walked to the base of a massive banyan tree and began clearing away the undergrowth. The spot was relatively flat and sheltered from the wind, a decent place for a temporary camp. More importantly, I had spotted a plant nearby that looked like wild taro. I didn't know if it was poisonous, but it was a sign of potential food. Victoria silently tended to her wounds, sucking in a sharp breath every time the antiseptic touched raw skin, but she didn't make a sound. Once she was done, she sat there with her bare feet, watching me work. The light began to fade. The temperature in the jungle started to drop, and a cool breeze whispered through the trees. I managed to construct a crude lean-to using branches and large leaves. In front of it, I cleared a small patch of ground for a fire pit. Fire. In the wild, it meant light, warmth, and safety. It kept the predators at bay. It was the key to our survival tonight. I gathered some dry tinder and wood, then fashioned a simple bow drill from a sturdy branch and a flat piece of softwood. "Over here," I called to Victoria. She hesitated for a moment before carefully walking over on her bare feet. I handed her the drill and the fireboard. "See? Make fire." "Me?" Her eyes widened as if I'd asked her to build a rocket ship. I don't know how." "I'll teach you," I said, getting straight to the point. I showed her how to rapidly spin the spindle against the fireboard using the bow, generating enough friction and heat to ignite the tinder nest I'd placed in a small notch. "Got it." She nodded, then shook her head. "It's simple," I said, pressing the tools into her hands. "Get started. We don't eat until there's a fire." I pulled out the taro-like roots I'd dug up and tossed them in my hand. Victoria's eyes followed the roots, and she swallowed hard. She hadn't eaten or had a proper drink of water all day. The primal instinct for survival finally overpowered her pride. She knelt on the ground, mimicking my posture, and awkwardly began working the bow drill. Her movements were clumsy and weak. After several minutes of frantic effort, she hadn't even produced a wisp of smoke. "Harder, faster," I barked, standing over her like a drill sergeant. She clenched her jaw and increased her speed. Sweat beaded on her forehead and dripped onto the dusty ground. 10 minutes. 20. Her palms were rubbed raw by the rough wood. "I can't. I have no strength left." She stopped, her hands shaking. I could see new blisters forming on her palms. "Keep going." My voice was merciless. "If you want to eat, if you want to live, you keep going." "You." Her eyes welled up with angry tears. "Crying won't help you," I said, watching her coldly. Tears are the most worthless currency out here. Perhaps my coldness finally broke through to her. A stubborn fire rekindled in Victoria's eyes. She shot me a hateful glare, wiped her tears away, and attacked the bow drill with a vengeance. This time, it was as if she was channeling all her fear and rage into the motion. Finally, a thin curl of smoke rose from the fireboard. Smoke, blow on it gently. I immediately knelt beside her, holding the tinder nest to the glowing ember and blowing softly. The ember glowed brighter. Whoosh! A tiny flame flickered to life. Success! The moment she saw the flame, Victoria's entire body went limp. She looked down at her red, bleeding hands, and the dam finally broke. She began to sob, not loudly, but in quiet, shuddering gasps. It wasn't a cry of self-pity, but a release of all the tension and fear that had been building up inside her. I didn't comfort her. I just methodically added kindling to the flame, building it into a steady, crackling fire. The firelight danced on our faces, illuminating the brutal, simple law of this new world. Here, nothing was given. Everything had to be earned, even a little bit of warmth. 4. With the fire roaring, the world suddenly felt safer. The dancing flames pushed back the darkness and the cold, bringing with them a sliver of civilization. I buried the wild roots in the hot embers at the edge of the fire to cook. Before long, a strange, sweet, and smoky aroma filled the air. Victoria had stopped crying. She sat on the other side of the fire, hugging her knees and staring blankly into the flames. Her face, smudged with dirt and smoke, held a complex expression: exhaustion, confusion, and maybe a hint of accomplishment. After all, she had made this fire with her own 2 hands. It was the first time in her life she had created something through sheer physical effort, not with commands or a checkbook. "Hey," I said. She looked up, her eyes still a bit unfocused. I used a stick to pull a charred root from the embers, blew on it, and broke it in half. The inside was a steaming, golden yellow, smelling incredible. I tossed one half to her. "Eat." She caught it on instinct, hissing as the heat seared her hands, nearly dropping it. She stared at the blackened lump, her brow furrowed with obvious disgust. "What's wrong? Used to 5-star dining, Miss Sterling. This isn't good enough for you?" I took a large bite of my own piece, making sure to chew loudly with satisfaction. I had to admit, it was surprisingly good. It tasted like a cross between a sweet potato and a chestnut, starchy and sweet. Victoria's stomach chose that moment to let out a loud, traitorous growl. The sound was deafening in the quiet jungle night. Her face flushed crimson, a blush that spread from her cheeks all the way to the tips of her ears. In the end, hunger won out over her pride. She copied me, carefully peeling back the burnt skin and taking a tiny, hesitant bite. The next second, her eyes lit up. All pretense of the high and mighty CEO vanished. She began to devour the root like a starving refugee. After finishing the first piece, she was clearly still hungry. She looked longingly at the remaining roots in the fire. Without a word, I tossed her another one. This time, she caught it and started eating without hesitation. With 2 roots in her belly, she finally seemed to regain some of her strength. We had no water, so we had to chew everything thoroughly to get it down. After we ate, a silence fell between us, broken only by the crackle and pop of the fire. From deep within the jungle, the occasional howl of an unknown creature sent a shiver down my spine. Victoria instinctively edged closer to the fire, and to me. "Do you think we'll actually survive this?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. I glanced at her. She was looking up at the sky, where a few stars were visible through the dense canopy. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. Or maybe tomorrow we end up as some predator's crap." My words were blunt and cruel, but she didn't argue. We both knew it was the truth. She was quiet for a long time before speaking again. "Ethan, you seem to know what you're doing. What did you do before this?" "Me?" I chuckled, adding another log to the fire. "Same as you, in a way, Miss Sterling. I was a corporate drone in a cubicle, getting chewed out by my boss, killing myself with overtime for a paycheck that barely covered rent. Then how do you know all this? All this survival stuff?" I finished for her. "I grew up in the mountains, out in Montana. We were poor. I spent my childhood hunting and foraging with my grandpa. When I grew up and moved to the city, my only hobby was outdoor adventure. Rock climbing, backpacking, wilderness survival. I did it all." I said it with a hint of self-mockery. Back then, I thought it was just a useless hobby. Never imagined it would be the one thing that could save my life. Ironic, isn't it? Victoria listened quietly. The firelight flickered across her face, softening her usually cold features. "You know, I used to look down on people like you," she said suddenly. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to continue. "No ambition, content with mediocrity, wasting time and money on pointless hobbies instead of climbing the ladder." She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "I always believed that the point of life was to ascend, to create value, to be in control. To me, your way of life, it was a waste. And now?" I asked, intrigued. She looked down at her own hands, blistered, dirty, and raw. "Now, I don't know any more," she said quietly. "Everything I worked for, everything I valued, means nothing out here. And your pointless hobbies are the only reason we're still alive." She looked up, and for the first time, her eyes met mine on an equal level, filled with a new, searching curiosity. "Ethan, am I pathetic?" I looked at her. In the firelight, I thought I saw the glint of a tear in the corner of her eye. In that moment, she wasn't the powerful Ms. Sterling. She was just a woman in her 20s, lost in the wilderness, whose entire worldview had been shattered. And suddenly, I didn't hate her so much anymore. "No," I shook my head. "You just had it too easy before. You're right. On this island, I'm a king. But if we go back to the city, I'm a nobody again. And you, Victoria Sterling, will go right back to being the person who can decide my fate with a snap of your fingers. We're just playing different roles under different sets of rules." My words seemed to strike a chord with her. She stared at me for a long, long time. "So, you're not made of stone after all," she said, seemingly out of nowhere. Then she pulled a large banana leaf over herself, turned her back to me, and lay down. I was confused for a second, then I understood. She meant that I was capable of admitting my own weakness, of acknowledging that in the civilized world, I was just an ordinary man. I smiled to myself, leaned back against the tree trunk, and closed my eyes. That night, something between us quietly began to change. 5. The first night on the island passed with a surprising lack of incident. Maybe the fire did its job, because no large animals came to investigate our camp. The next morning, I woke up because of an all-consuming thirst. My throat felt like it was coated in sandpaper, and my lips were cracked and bleeding. I opened my eyes. The fire had died down to a pile of warm ash. Victoria was still asleep, curled up under her banana leaf, with droplets of dew clinging to her long eyelashes. She looked almost pitiful. Finding fresh water was the most critical task of the day. I woke Victoria, and we split the last of the roasted roots. After our meager breakfast, we set out again. The blisters on Victoria's feet were still painful, and walking barefoot on the sharp rocks and twigs of the forest floor was agony. But she gritted her teeth and followed me without a single complaint. "Water, water." After less than an hour, she was at her limit. She was mumbling deliriously, her steps becoming unsteady. I knew she was close to collapsing. If we didn't find water soon, we were both going to die of dehydration. Just as I was starting to panic, my ears pricked up. I heard it, an incredibly faint but unmistakable sound of trickling water. This way, my spirits soared. I pushed through the brush, heading toward the sound. We burst through a thicket of ferns, and the view opened up before us. A clear, sparkling stream. The water glinted in the sunlight, its gentle burbling the most beautiful music I had ever heard. "Water! It's water!" The sight of it made Victoria cry out with joy. She threw caution to the wind, scrambling down the bank and collapsing at the water's edge. Like a desperate animal, she plunged her face into the stream and began to drink greedily. "Hey, don't drink it straight," I yelled, rushing to stop her. Untreated water in the wild can be full of parasites and bacteria. But she was too far gone with thirst to listen. Frankly, I didn't care much either. I dropped to my knees beside her and drank my fill. The cool, sweet water flowed down my throat, soothing my parched organs. It was better than any champagne, any fine wine. After we had drunk our fill, we filled our 2 plastic bottles. The immediate crisis was over. Victoria sat on a rock by the stream, washing the grime from her face and the dirt from the cuts on her feet. The water seemed to wash away some of her tension, softening her features. I, meanwhile, was surveying the area. This stream was the lifeline of the island. Where there was water, there were animals. That meant a potential source of meat, but it also meant danger. Predators would come here to drink, too. My eyes were suddenly drawn to a set of prints in the soft mud by the stream bank. They were large, paw prints with deep claw marks. My heart sank. A big cat. A bear. Either one would be a death sentence for two unarmed people. Ethan, look. What's that? Victoria's voice, full of curiosity, came from behind me. I followed her pointed finger. Across the stream, set into a rocky cliff face, was a dark opening. A cave. It was 100 times better as a shelter than the lean-to we'd built last night. Let's go check it out. My energy returned. We waded across the shallow stream and climbed the rocky bank on the other side. The cave entrance was small, forcing us to duck to get inside, but it opened up into a larger chamber. It was dry, spacious, and more than enough room for the two of us. It was the perfect shelter. As I was excitedly taking in our new home, Victoria tugged on my sleeve, her voice trembling as she pointed to a dark corner. What? What is that? A chill went down my spine. I looked where she was pointing. There, in the deepest part of the cave, lay a skeleton. It was old and weathered, surrounded by the tattered remains of clothing. It seemed we weren't the first unlucky souls to end up on this island. The discovery cast a dark cloud over our excitement. A living person had died here. Did we really have any hope of making it out alive? Just then, a low, guttural snarl echoed from the cave entrance. We both spun around, our hearts leaping into our throats. Blocking the entrance was a massive wild boar. Its body was covered in coarse, black bristles like steel wires. Two long, sharp tusks jutted from its mouth, and its small, bloodshot eyes were fixed on us. Shit, we had just trespassed into its home. Roar! The boar let out a furious bellow and charged. The stench of the animal hit me like a physical blow. Victoria screamed, scrambling behind me out of pure instinct. My mind went blank. Run! It was the only thought I had. But the entrance was blocked. There was nowhere to go. Just as the boar's gleaming tusks were about to gore Victoria, I don't know what came over me. With a yell, I shoved her hard to the side, raised a multi-tool, my only weapon, and charged the beast head-on. Squelch! The sharp blade plunged deep into the boar's eye. Squeal! The boar let out a horrific, piercing scream. In its agony, it thrashed its head wildly. A massive force slammed into me, sending me flying. My back crashed against the hard rock wall, and the impact nearly made me black out from the pain. With one eye ruined, the boar was enraged beyond reason. It began ramming its head against the cave walls, making the whole chamber tremble. I tried to push myself up, but a searing pain shot through my chest, and I coughed up a mouthful of blood. My ribs, they were broken. It was over. As the boar turned and charged at me again, my mind filled with despair. But in that split second of impending death, "You bastard, Dot!" A sharp cry rang out. I saw Victoria. She had grabbed a sharp-edged rock and, with all her might, had smashed it into the boar's other eye. The boar clearly hadn't expected the seemingly helpless prey to fight back. The rock found its mark. The other I was instantly reduced to a bloody pulp. Completely blind, the boar thrashed wildly around the cave before finally slamming headfirst into a wall and collapsing in a heap. Dead silence returned to the cave. I lay on the ground, gasping for air, each breath in agony. Victoria had crumpled to the floor, her body shaking uncontrollably, her face a mess of blood and mud. She looked at me, her lips trembling, trying to speak but unable to form words. I managed a weak, bloody grin, wanting to tell her it was okay. But when I opened my mouth, more blood came out. "Don't worry." I forced the words out. "As long as I'm here, you won't die." Then the world faded to black. I was woken by a wave of intense pain. When I opened my eyes, I was still on the cold floor of the cave. The dead boar lay nearby like a small mountain. I tried to move, but a piercing pain in my chest made me suck in a sharp breath. "Don't move." A voice, choked with tears, spoke beside me. I turned my head and saw Victoria kneeling by my side. Her beautiful eyes were red and swollen, and fresh tear tracks stained her dirty cheeks. She was holding bandages from the first aid kit, awkwardly trying to wrap them around my chest. "You're awake?" She sounded relieved and overjoyed. I nodded weakly, which pulled at my injury, making me wince. How long was I out?" Almost a full day, she said in a small voice, continuing to wrap the bandage. You lost so much blood. I couldn't wake you. I thought you were. Her voice broke, and fresh tears started to fall. Seeing her like this stirred something in me. This woman, so arrogant and spoiled, had stayed by my side while I was unconscious. She had faced her fears to tend to my wounds. What are you crying for? I said, my voice raspy. I'm not dead yet. She wrapped the bandages tightly around my chest. It still hurt like hell, but at least my ribs felt stabilized and breathing became a little easier. Her movements were gentle and careful, as if she were terrified of hurting me. It was the first time in my life anyone had treated me with such tenderness. I looked at her face, so close to mine. That usually icy expression was replaced with pure worry and fear. Her long eyelashes were clumped together with tears, making her look incredibly vulnerable. On an impulse I couldn't explain, I reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. My fingertips brushed against her soft, smooth skin. Her entire body went rigid. A deep blush spread rapidly across her face. She jerked back as if she'd been burned, lowering her head so she wouldn't have to look at me. The atmosphere in the cave suddenly became charged and awkward. Ahem. I cleared my throat to break the silence. The boar. It's dead. Yes, she mumbled, still looking at the ground. I killed it. With a rock. Good job, I said, and I meant it. To find the courage to fight back in that situation. This woman was stronger than I had given her credit for. You, just lie still. I'll get you something to eat, she said, scrambling to her feet as if desperate to escape the awkward tension. She hurried to the cave entrance. I lay there watching her go, a faint smile playing on my lips. A few minutes later, she returned with a makeshift bowl made from a large leaf, filled with fresh water from the stream. She knelt beside me, carefully lifting my head and holding the water to my lips. I rested against her, breathing in her unique scent, a faint mixture of sweat and something floral. Her body was soft and warm. After drinking, I felt the familiar pang of hunger. I want meat, I said, looking at the dead boar and licking my lips. Victoria's face paled. The thought of butchering that bloody carcass was clearly a horrifying challenge for her. Go on, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. I need protein to heal. Do you want me to die, or do you want us to starve to death together? She bit her lip, her eyes darting between me and the dead boar, a war raging within her. Finally, without a word, she picked up my multi-tool and walked over to the boar. I saw that her hand was shaking uncontrollably. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then plunged the blade in. The next few minutes were gruesome. I watched as she fought back gags, awkwardly hacking away at the boar's flesh. Blood and viscera stained her hands and clothes. The high and mighty CEO, with a crippling case of germophobia, was now acting as a butcher. I knew this process was a kind of torture for her, breaking down every last bit of the person she used to be. But I also knew it was necessary. This was the only way she would truly adapt, the only way she would grow strong enough to survive this world. After half an hour, she had managed to cut away a large portion of the hind leg and drag it back to the fire pit. She collapsed next to it, completely spent and pale as a ghost. I instructed her on how to cut the meat into strips, skewer them on green branches, and roast them over the fire. Soon, the rich, savory smell of cooking meat filled the cave. To us, who had eaten nothing but roots for days, the aroma was intoxicating. She brought the first cooked piece to me. I took it and began to eat ravenously. The meat was tough and unseasoned, but it was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted in my life. Watching me eat, a faint smile finally touched Victoria's lips. It was like the first thaw of spring, and it seemed to brighten the entire cave. Is it good? She asked softly. I nodded. Delicious. You eat too. Only then did she pick up a skewer for herself and begin to eat in small, delicate bites. As she ate, tears began to fall from her eyes again. Now what are you crying about? I asked, exasperated. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. I don't know. I feel like we're actually going to make it. We're going to live. I looked at her, and a warmth spread through my chest. She was right. We had fire, water, meat, and a safe shelter. It seemed we really were going to survive this. And we had done it together. In the days that followed, My injuries slowly began to heal under Victoria's diligent care. My broken ribs would take time, but I could at least sit up and perform simple tasks. Victoria, meanwhile, underwent a complete transformation. She was no longer the helpless socialite who was afraid of bugs. She had learned how to butcher an animal, how to identify edible plants and berries, and could even go to the stream to fetch water by herself. Our division of labor was clear. I was the strategist, teaching her the survival skills I knew. She was the one who executed the plans. Every day, she would tidy up the cave, bring me roasted meat and boiled water, and stand guard by the fire at night, listening for any strange noises from the jungle. She did it all without complaint, and even seemed to find a certain satisfaction in it. Sometimes I would test her, making her massage my legs or shoulders. She would just blush and quietly obey. It was a strange feeling, watching the once untouchable Ice Queen now acting as meek as a kitten, completely in my command, satisfied a primal, masculine part of my soul. Ethan. One day, as I was leaning against the cave wall, enjoying the sun, Victoria came and sat down beside me. "What's up?" I asked lazily. She hesitated before speaking. When will your injuries be fully healed? What, getting tired of having a cripple dragging you down?" I shot her a sidelong glance. "No." She shook her head quickly, rushing to explain. "That's not what I mean. I think we can't stay here forever." She looked out at the vast ocean, a hint of worry in her eyes. "We have to find a way to leave." I was silent. I had been thinking the same thing. The cave was safe, but it was a prison. We couldn't spend the rest of our lives here. "And how do you propose we do that?" I asked her. "Build a yacht. We could build a raft." It was clear she'd given this some thought. "We could tie logs together with vines. If we can just get out on the water, there's a chance a passing ship might see us." Her eyes were shining with a brilliant light of hope. Looking at her like that, I didn't have the heart to crush her spirit. "Victoria, do you have any idea how far it is to the nearest shipping lane? Do you know what kind of dangers we'd face on the open ocean? Sharks, storms, dying of thirst." My barrage of questions made the light in her eyes flicker and dim. "Then, what do we do?" she asked, looking lost. "Are we just going to be trapped here forever?" "Of course not," I said, giving her shoulder a reassuring pat. "We'll find a way, but not yet. Right now, the most important thing is to keep surviving. Once I'm fully healed, I'll lead an expedition to survey the entire island. We need to find the highest point and build a signal. Until then, your job is to follow my lead." My words seemed to calm her down. She nodded, her response a quiet, obedient, "Okay." Seeing her so docile, a mischievous thought popped into my head. "Victoria," I said, my voice serious. "Yes. How about we make a bet?" "A bet? What kind of bet?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. I leaned in close to her ear and whispered something that made her face turn beet red. "Let's bet on whether or not I can get you off this island alive. If I win, when we get back to civilization, you'll be my personal maid for 1 year. You'll do whatever I say. No questions asked, no resistance." Her breath hitched. The blush on her cheeks deepened to a beautiful crimson. You're shameless," she hissed, glaring at me, though her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. "What? You scared to take the bet?" I goaded her. "Or do you have so little faith in me that you think we'll never get off this island?" "Oh, who said I was scared? My taunt worked perfectly." She took the bait. "You're on, but what if you lose?" "If I lose," I let out a laugh. "If I lose, I'll be dead. What does it matter then? It'll be up to you to survive on your own." My words sobered her. She was right. If I lost, it meant we had failed, and failure meant death. "Fine." After a long pause, she looked up, her eyes filled with a new determination. "I'll take your bet, but I have a condition." "Oh, let's hear it. If we make it back," she bit her lip, looking embarrassed. "Being your maid is one thing, but you can't make me do inappropriate things." "What kind of inappropriate things?" I asked, playing dumb. "You know." Her face was on fire now. She stammered for a moment before forcing the words out through clenched teeth. "The kind of things you're thinking about." Seeing her so flustered and cute, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. "All right, I promise." I held out my hand. "Shake on it." She hesitated for a second, then placed her small, soft hand in mine. Our hands clasped briefly. With that simple gesture, an absurd wager was made. I looked at her, and she looked at me. The air in the cave was thick with unspoken energy. We both knew this bet was more than just a game. It was a promise, a beacon of hope, and it bound our fates together more tightly than ever before. When we get back to civilization, will you still acknowledge me as your master, Victoria Sterling? I, for one, couldn't wait to find out. After we made the bet, the dynamic between us shifted into something entirely new. She was no longer just my partner in survival. It was as if she had become my property, and she, for her part, seemed to have accepted this new role. Every day, she would organize our little cave, laying down animal hides on the floor, building a small stone stove, and even picking wildflowers to place in the cracks of the rock walls. Slowly, the cold, damp cave began to feel like a home. My injuries were healing well, and I was able to walk around slowly. The first thing I did once I was mobile was to lead her in butchering the rest of the wild boar. We cut the meat into thin strips, strung them on vines, and hung them at the cave entrance to dry into jerky. I tanned the hide, and it became a crude but warm blanket. I didn't even waste the bones. I smashed them and boiled them with wild greens in a pot we fashioned from a large shell, making a rich, nourishing broth. The first time she tasted the soup, Victoria was so moved she nearly cried. "Ethan, you're a genius," she exclaimed, sipping the broth. I just smiled. These were basic survival skills. But to her, a woman who had never had to lift a finger for herself, it was nothing short of magic. With a stable food supply, our life settled into a comfortable routine. During the day, I would take her exploring in the jungle, teaching her to identify edible plants, how to set traps for small game. She was a quick and diligent student. The same competitive drive she had in the boardroom, she now applied to learning how to survive. Sometimes we would go down to the beach. I would use a sharpened stick as a spear to catch fish in the tide pools, while she would collect clams and mussels in a small basket she wove from vines. In the evenings, we would sit on the beach by a crackling fire, grilling our fresh catch and watching the fiery sun sink below the horizon. It was peaceful, beautiful. It felt as if the rest of the world had fallen away, leaving just the two of us and the endless sea. "Ethan," one evening, she leaned against me, watching the sunset. "Do you miss home?" Her voice was soft, tinged with a sadness she rarely showed. I thought for a moment. Home. My parents had died when I was young. I grew up with my grandfather in the mountains. For me, home was a small village with smoke curling from the chimneys, not the tiny apartment I rented in the city. "Not really," I said. "You miss your multi-million-dollar penthouse." She shook her head. "I don't miss the apartment," she said quietly. "I miss my father. He's getting older, and his health hasn't been good. I can't imagine what the news of our disappearance has done to him." Her voice cracked. A wave of sympathy washed over me. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her closer. Her body stiffened for a moment, but then she relaxed, leaning her head against my chest. She was so soft and smelled faintly of wood smoke in the sea. I could feel a slight tremor running through her. "Don't think about it too much," I said softly. "We're going to get back. I promise." She didn't answer, just buried her face in my chest, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I didn't say anything else. I just held her, letting her tears soak my shirt. I knew that beneath her tough exterior, this woman was full of fear and vulnerability. In the civilized world, she had to arm herself with ice and steel. But here, in a world that contained only the two of us, she could finally let her guard down. After a long while, her crying subsided. She lifted her head from my chest. Her eyes were red, making her look like a frightened rabbit. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her gaze earnest. "For what?" "Thank you. For not leaving me behind." I smiled and gently pinched her cheek. "Don't be silly. If I left you, who would be my maid?" Her face flushed, and she gave my chest a light punch. It was a soft, weak tap, more of a caress than a blow. The sea breeze blew gently around us. We sat there in silence, holding each other by the fire. One man, one woman. One cave, one fire. In that moment, it felt like we were the entire world. The days bled into one another. Before we knew it, we had been on the island for over a month. My injuries had fully healed, and Victoria and I had become something akin to a true wilderness couple. We hunted together, foraged together, cooked together, and huddled together for warmth against the night's chill. We developed a silent, unspoken understanding. The way she looked at me had changed. The initial disgust and fear were gone, replaced by dependence and something else, something deeper I couldn't quite name. And I had gotten used to her presence, used to waking up and seeing her tending the fire, used to the look of admiration in her eyes when I brought back a catch, used to the feeling of her soft body next to mine as we slept. I even had the fleeting thought that I could live like this forever. But I knew that was a lie. This was not our world. One day, I led her to the highest peak in the center of the island. My goal was simple: get a lay of the land and build a distress signal that couldn't be missed. From the summit, the view was breathtaking. The turquoise ocean, the golden beaches, the emerald jungle. It was all laid out before us. "It's beautiful," Victoria breathed, standing beside me. I didn't reply. I just took out my multi-tool and started clearing a patch of ground. Then I sent her down to the beach to collect the whitest stone she could find. We spent the entire day working under the hot sun, arranging the white stones into a giant SOS on the cleared ground. When we finished, we both collapsed exhausted. "Will this be enough?" Victoria panted. "It should be," I nodded. "If any planes or ships pass by, they should be able to see it from a distance." "And what if none do?" "Then we wait." We sat on the peak, watching the sun go down, a heavy silence between us. Hope. It was the most beautiful and the most torturous thing in the world. From that day on, every morning we would climb the peak and scan the horizon. And every day, we would return to our cave, disappointed. The days began to feel like a slow torture of rising hope and crushing despair. Victoria and I started talking less. We were both avoiding the elephant in the room. What happens if we actually get back? Back there, she was the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, and I was the low-level employee she could fire on a whim. Would the relationship we had built here, one of equals, one where I was the leader, survive the crushing weight of civilized society? Would she honor our bet? I was afraid to even think about it, afraid that even acknowledging it would shatter the fragile peace we had found. Until that day, we climbed the peak, same as always. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue. The ocean was as smooth as glass. Well, nothing today, either. Victoria's disappointed sigh was cut short when I grabbed her arm, my eyes fixed on the horizon. "Look, what is that?" My voice was trembling with excitement. Victoria followed my gaze, and then her eyes went wide. On the distant horizon, there was a tiny black speck. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't a rock. As we watched, the speck grew larger, its shape becoming clearer. It was a ship, a massive, white cruise ship. "A ship! It's a ship!" Victoria was babbling, laughing, and crying at the same time as she clung to my arm. "Ethan, we're saved. We're actually saved." My own heart was hammering against my ribs. Saved. We were finally getting off this godforsaken island. I tore off my shirt, tied it to a stick, soaked it with the animal fat we had rendered, and lit it on fire. I waved the makeshift torch wildly in the air. Victoria copied me, waving her own tattered white suit jacket with all her might. Help was right there. But for some reason, as I watched that ship get closer, the elation I expected to feel was absent. In its place was a profound and unsettling sense of loss. I turned and looked at Victoria. Her face was lit up with the pure joy of a second chance at life, her eyes glued to the approaching ship. She couldn't wait to go back, could she? Back to her world, back to her throne. I looked at her, and the words came out before I could stop them. "Victoria." "Yes," she answered breathlessly, still waving. "When we get back, does our bet still stand?" Her movements froze. The ecstatic smile on her face vanished. She slowly turned her head to look at me, her expression a maelstrom of emotions. Excitement, confusion, conflict, and a flicker of fear I didn't understand. "When we go back, will we still be us?" The question hung between us, heavy as an anchor. The ship, our symbol of hope, had suddenly become a dividing line, threatening to tear our fragile two-person world apart. The cruise ship was getting closer. We could even make out the tiny figures of people on its deck. The wind on the summit was strong, making our torch sputter and roar. Victoria remained frozen, staring at me, not answering my question. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions. I knew the question was an impossible one for her. To agree meant that when she returned to civilization, she would have to turn her entire life upside down, submitting to a man who was once her subordinate. For someone as proud as her, it was unthinkable. To refuse meant she was breaking the sacred promise we had made, the one forged in the crucible of survival. It would mean that everything we had built here was nothing more than a desperate charade. "What's the matter?" I pushed, my voice turning cold as I stared into her eyes, getting ready to go back to being Miss Sterling and pretending none of this happened. My words were a dagger, and they found their mark. Her body trembled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The ship's horn blew, a long, deep sound that rolled across the water. It was the sound of civilization, the sound of judgment. I looked at her and suddenly felt tired. What was I even expecting? Did I really think a few weeks of playing Robinson Crusoe would make a woman like her fall for me? I was a tool, a means to an end in a desperate situation. Now that the crisis was over, the tool was about to be discarded. I let out a bitter, self-mocking laugh and threw the torch to the ground. "Forget it, Victoria. I get it." I turned my back to her. "Let's get ready to go down. Your world is waiting for you." My voice was hollow with a disappointment so deep it ached. I took a step to leave, and then a small, soft hand grabbed my wrist from behind, holding on tight. I stopped and turned. Victoria was looking at me, her red-rimmed eyes overflowing with tears. But her gaze was unwavering. "Ethan." Her voice was perfectly clear, each word sharp and deliberate. "I agree." I froze. "What? What did you say?" "I said, I agree," she repeated, her voice stronger, tears streaming down her face. "Our bet still stands. Here or back in that world, it still stands." She took a step closer, gripping my arms, her eyes locked on mine, as if trying to pour all of her conviction into me. "What kind of person do you think I am? Some liar who goes back on her word?" "Yes, I am Victoria Sterling. I'm the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. I'm used to being in charge, to being on top." "But," her voice rose, trembling with emotion, "on this island, it was you. You taught me how to live. You showed me that a person could have dignity without all the empty titles and status. It was you who shielded me from the boar's tusks when I was about to die. It was you who gave me a shoulder to cry on when I was at my breaking point. You asked me what our relationship will be when we get back." She suddenly smiled. It was a watery, tear-stained smile, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips against mine. It was a light, gentle kiss, cool and wet with her tears. My brain short-circuited. "My answer is..." She whispered the word against my lips, so softly only I could hear. "From now on, you are my only master." In that instant, the wind howled and the waves crashed. The distant ship's horn seemed to sound in celebration of our new beginning. I looked at the crying woman before me, at the undisguised love and submission in her eyes, and the icy despair in my heart was instantly flooded with a powerful, overwhelming warmth. I lost control. I lowered my head and crushed my mouth to hers. This kiss was nothing like her gentle one. It was fierce, possessive, a raw declaration of ownership. She responded with a clumsy, desperate passion, as if trying to merge her very soul with mine. I don't know how long we stood there, locked together. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. I held her in my arms and looked out at the approaching cruise ship, all my fear and uncertainty gone. I knew our life on the island was over, but a new life, something far more thrilling and unpredictable, was just beginning. So what if we were returning to civilization? This woman was mine now, body and soul. She would be my proudest conquest and my one and only personal maid.